Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Silverman, co-founder of Commerce Next. We are a community event series and conference for marketers at retail and DTC brands. On behalf of my co-founders, Veronica Sonsev and Alan Dick, welcome to today's webinar, Deep Dive into Composable Commerce. This is a really important e-commerce technology trend. We've touched on it in the past in our webinars and other events, and today we're really going to address it directly, and I'm excited to dive into that. We want to demystify it for anyone that's been reading about it and doesn't quite know exactly how to think about it. We also want to provide guidance to our audience to determine if it's the right solution for their business, and then even going further and thinking about how to begin implementing. So as always, we'll be taking your questions. Feel free to load them up during the presentation. I'll explain how to do that in a moment. But thank you for tuning in and making the time to join live or listening to our replay. I have a few important thank yous I want to start with. Most importantly, I want to thank today's speakers who are taking time out of their schedules to share their insights and experience. Joe Megibow, CEO of Bright Cellars, Angela Gruszka, SVP of Digital Marketing and E-commerce at AERIN, Kelly Gaich, Chief Strategy Officer at Commerce Tools, Dan Berger, Delivery Partner at Apply Digital. And I really want to thank Commerce Tools and Apply Digital for sponsoring today's webinar. As always, we can't bring these webinars, regular webinars, to our audience without the support of our sponsor. It's been a pleasure working with Kelly and Dan and their teams on the webinar, and I appreciate them supporting this very important topic. Also want to thank Maeve, Robert, Alan, Jill, Veronica from the Commerce Next team who are behind the scenes making sure this webinar is a success today. And thank you to our audience for joining us. So we're doing this again. You can enter to win a Mesa Solo Stove. These are perfectly designed for the backyard or urban settings. It's a tabletop fire pit that's really cool. Excuse me. And we shamelessly want you to follow us on Instagram. So we're willing to buy your love. To win this solo brand, just follow us on Instagram and like the most recent post from Commerce Next. So our webinar is back again in a couple of weeks, coming up Wednesday, August 16th, called Understanding Shopper Psychology as we get ready for Black Friday and Cyber Week. And we have a great group of people, Komuto Group, Sucharita from Forrester, AB Tasty, Andrea Moore from Nest. And that's going to be moderated by my fellow co-founder, Alan Dick. Again, that's in 2 weeks, Wednesday, August 16th. And we always like to remind everyone about our YouTube channel. There are thousands of sessions, I think thousands, at least, if not thousands, hundreds of recorded conversations, sessions, webinars on practically every e-commerce topic you can think of. So I encourage you, if you haven't, to go visit there and take advantage of the knowledge that's there. So as far as our agenda, after we get kind of finished up with some quick housekeeping info, we're going to have Kelly and Dan give a presentation, the deep dive into Composable Commerce. We'll do a couple audience polls to kind of see where everyone is and what they're thinking, and then we'll jump into our panel discussion, adding in AERIN, Bright Cellars with Kelly and Dan. A couple housekeeping notes. We always record these, so don't worry about missing anything. We'll make the recording available by tomorrow. And I want to show you where a couple things are on your screen so you can make sure to interact with us as much as you'd like. The one thing to keep in mind, everything is on the upper right of your console. You can ask questions and participate in the live chat. You can get handouts and on and on. Specifically related to the questions, if you go to the Q&A on that upper right, you can ask questions in there. And there's also an upvoting feature. So if there's a question you see that's really interesting, give it an upvote and we'll make sure that gets prioritized. And the handouts, there's a couple, there's the presentation that we're going to be giving from Kelly and Dan. You can download that. And then there's a couple other resources on composable commerce that are in there as well. And then if you're listening to the recording, you can look on that bottom right and get all of the past polling questions and the handouts and all the other stuff I've been mentioning so far. So that is everything I wanted to mention. I'm excited now to bring on Kelly and Dan to our virtual stage. Kelly Gage is he's the chief strategy officer at Commerce Tools. He's one of the most passionate believers in composable commerce that I've come across. And then we're going to hear from him first, and then Daniel's going to be joining him. He's a partner at Applied Digital. Previous to this role, he spent nearly 7 years with Best Buy, most recently as Senior Director of Product Management, Customer and Corporate Technology. So he's walked in your shoes. With that, I would like to introduce Kelly and bring him onto the Commerce Next virtual stage. Kelly, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here today. All right. Well, we're going to do a quick deep dive on composable commerce. And along with Dan, we'll be explaining what composable commerce is. We'll go through the stages of commerce and how that's evolved over time. We'll look at if it's a right fit for you. And, I'll give you a spoiler here. It is not right for everyone. I've been really big on saying that. It certainly makes sense in many cases. It absolutely does not make sense other times. So we'll go through that. We'll go through why go composable now. And Dan will be leading that. And then Dan will also be leading the total cost of ownership and how composable impacts that. It's not the same. So with that, composable commerce, if we look back historically, we had headless commerce in 2013, which Commerce Tools invented. And Commerce Tools was first to market, invented the concept, and it was out of the realization that legacy platforms were built with a head on them. And I remember doing ATG development work. ATG is now Oracle Commerce back in the day. And there, a lot of the logic for how the website actually worked, and yes, they were all websites back then, I'm that old, it was embedded in the front end. It would actually be in the front end JSP files, the HTML. So the two were inseparable. There was no concept of headless. But we got the whole notion of a second head with the introduction of the iPhone in 2007. That gave rise to REST APIs. And that really gave rise to what we now call MACH, M-A-C-H, which Commerce Tools also invented as an acronym. And we co-founded the MACH Alliance. And MACH is great as a term, but it's a very technical term. And broadly, what it refers to is microservices, API first, cloud native, multi-tenant, SaaS, and headless, MACH. So that's great for technologists, but it's not very good at explaining what this actually is or what the business value is to more of a business audience. Think of your CFO, for example. Really, really hard to understand that. And Gartner came out with a bunch of really deep foundational research in about 2021, maybe early 2022. And it was all about composable. And they really did the background research, the studies, just all of that background material. And the term really caught on. And we at Commerce Tools latched onto it as well. We don't really talk about headless very much anymore. And MACH is more of a technical term. But composable broadly means being able to pick and choose different components from different best-of-breed vendors. It's not just taking everything in a box from a single vendor. Instead, it's all about consuming the pieces that work best for you and best for your business and solve your actual business challenges. And the advantage of that is you get to choose the best product for your specific need. And what's great about cloud is cloud gave rise to all of these best of breed vendors out there. We have CMSs, we have search, we have personalization, we have loyalty. You name it, we have specialized vendors for each one of those components. So you can very quickly and easily go out and find a SaaS vendor that does exactly what you need to do. So as a business user, you're composing that experience. And that's a pretty key differentiator. Behind the scenes, you're using MACH. So you're using microservices, you're using APIs. Mock is what enables composable commerce. So let's go through the stages of commerce and how things have kind of evolved over time. So again, this is my first foray into commerce was in the early 2000s. And there we have what we call Commerce One. And that was monoliths, do it all. And that worked fine back in the day. And it worked fine because back then you really needed to get going. You needed to go online. Retailers and other organizations didn't have the capabilities. This was all very new. And actually, in many cases, retailers, they would have store numbers for each one of their physical stores. So, they'd have stores 682 in Dayton, Ohio, right? A lot of the retailers back then just made their e-commerce channel, store number 684, right? They would just increment it, and that would be their digital store. So I think it was fine for that era, but obviously times have moved on. And then in the 2010s, that was really headless. SaaS started to become a thing. Remember, we didn't have clouds in the market until, I don't know, 2008, 2009 in any meaningful way. And there are two types of these SaaS-based solutions. So first is hosted, and I wouldn't call hosted SaaS, but it was taking something like a Hybris or a Demandware and running it in a public cloud and hosting it on a customer's behalf. And that was fine. It was a great evolution from having to do it on-prem in-house, but still kind of limited fundamentally. And then we had the introduction of Commerce 3.0, and that's composable, it's mock. And what's great there is you're choosing best of breed components, different vendors, different pieces. You're able to mix and match. You're composing an experience for your end shoppers. And that was a pretty fundamental breakthrough. And that was enabled because of mock, because of microservices, because of APIs, because of cloud. All of those granular pieces of functionality can now be pulled together very, very easily. And even through the cloud vendors out there, AWS, GCP, and Azure, you can even buy these best of breed vendors together in the same transaction. They all have very robust marketplaces. So it's really easy to buy, to procure, to technically integrate these solutions. And now with AI, you can go to ChatGPT 4 today and you can say, write me a connector from Commerce Tools to, I don't want to upset our CMS partners. I'll say CMS partner X, right? And it'll actually spit out all of the code for you in the programming language of your choice. You can even say, write me an integration from Commerce Tools to search vendor X in Fortran, and it'll actually write the code for you in Fortran. It's crazy. So AI makes composable even easier than it already is, which is great to see. And these are some representative vendors of that category. So Commerce One, again, fantastic products for their era, but it's been 30 plus years now. A lot of these products were built in the mid 90s. Commerce Two, those are more the hosted versions. Commerce 3, which the category we lead, we're multi-tenant, we're SaaS, we're API first, we're cloud native. We use event-based architectures, very, very modern, something you can throw to a normal developer today and have them be productive with it. But it's not really for everyone. And I'm fully understanding of that. Not every technology is. I don't believe in zealotry over any technology. I think of technology as a tool, right? Think of it as a hammer. Think of it as a saw. And if you don't know how to use a handsaw, a skill saw, for example, you probably shouldn't touch it. You should rely on somebody else. And that's where either our partners, like Apply, come in, for example, and they do a great job of helping people. Or you can also do some in-house as well. And what the best customers we have do a combination of support and or some capabilities in-house. But folks like Apply can help with that migration, that transformation. Again, it's not for everyone. It's more for the mid-size enterprises and up, because there definitely is some complexity involved. If you're selling $50,000 worth of t-shirts online every year, just go with one of the small all-in-a-box vendors. That's fine. Where we really excel as an industry, as a category, is large, complicated, differentiated, interesting, multi-country, multi-region, multi-language, multi-everything. So I think that's where we really excel, and the barrier to adopting this is coming down by the day. So I'll turn it over to Dan. Explain why now is the right time, Dan.
Sounds good. Hey, everyone. I'll answer this one with a bit of perspective from my time at Best Buy. We went through a composable transformation going back to 2018. So I'll anchor this a little bit of why did we go through this in 2018 and why would now be a good time to go through it. I think there's a few points here. The first is, the vendors in this space, it's matured dramatically. I don't think you're, in going in this direction, I don't think you would be an early adopter at this point. I think when I went through this in 2018, there were still some areas where I felt like a little bit early, a little bit exploring. But just having kept with this space over the last few years, I think you're in good company and in good vendors in terms of just being able to find a partner that fits your scale or fits your problem set. The second one I think comes down to it is never going to, the demands on you and your team are never going to be as low as they are now. So everything is going to get faster. The rate of change is going to get faster. And I think for anyone that's considering this, the big question that I asked myself when we went through this change was, do I feel good about the speed in which my team is able to make changes and deliver? And I think that's the biggest thing is, when you look to the next few years, do you feel like you're in a place where, putting aside resourcing, and we're always short on resources, but just your ability to make changes, do you feel good about your ability to make change? For me, kind of the breaking point and where I went from being someone that was still advocating for our old stack to being someone that was trying to advocate for change was, I remember we had a form field in our checkout, and our marketing team said, "Hey, I got this really small thing. Your team's driving me a little bit crazy, though. They're saying it's going to take 9 months to add an optional form to checkout." And I remember sitting with the team, and everyone drew it on the whiteboard. And I said, "Look, I get everything that's been explained here. It totally makes sense. At the same time, we won't be in business if it takes 9 months to make this kind of a change. We have to make a change here." And so I think it comes down to really, your ability to meet an increased demand and an increased speed. The players in the space, I think, are mature, and it really comes down to, a bit like Kelly mentioned, it's not for everyone. But if you're extremely comfortable with your team's ability to make change, you might be fine. You might be at a scale or scope or problem set that the vendor you have is good. And similar to Kelly, I've been in every flavor of ATG and Demandware and Adobe. I've had great experiences with those vendors. But I think for many in this spot, you do reach a point where you just start to notice, why are we getting slow? Why are things that don't intuitively feel like they should take 9 months and millions of dollars? Why do they require 6 teams? Why do they require these large changes?
Yeah, well said. I see that so often. It's crazy how that tech debt can just build up over time, and it kind of calcifies within an environment. And
yeah, I will add one thing just as an anecdote. When we talked about that second gen of going headless, it's interesting. I went through those stages from Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3. And Gen 2, when we went to Gen 2, it felt like this instant speed boost, like someone hit the turbo button. But at the same time, you start to create actual more tech debt and bad patterns, because one part of you becomes really fast and one part of you becomes really slow. And you start to put, you find hacks and cheats and things in the front, the fast part of things. And so it's interesting how that tech debt creeps up on you. And you're at a point where just the whole stack has become a little bit of a battleship when you bought it, and it was a bit of a speedboat. In terms of total cost of ownership, it is a different model. It's a different operating model on the other side of things. And I saw that firsthand, being on a relatively or fairly large e-commerce store, several billions of dollars and lots of people running the store. Your costs will change, and they'll change differently. Where you're putting your energy will change too. So really there's kind of, I think, 3 buckets: people, process, technology. On the people side, you will need to look to hiring different skilled people. I think one of the biggest changes on our side was just the amount of React developers we needed. We went from a model where we had no React to looking for React developers in what was a fairly competitive market, fairly competitive skill set. You will also, of course, want to train and upskill those who maybe were working in another language, but aspirationally want to work in React or whatever it is that you're working in. And there's just some cultural changes there where people had perhaps an opinionated way of doing things because the platform you were on was opinionated. And now you will need to kind of mediate some of those debates because you're no longer tied to those opinionated ways of doing things. Process is one that I will say is easy to underdo. Process, you have a huge opportunity with this change to remove some gatekeeping process. I think one of the things that I recall most about going through this change is the tech would often dictate, approval queues and who does what, and certain things that are simple, like why can't we publish, new homepage content? Doesn't need a technology gatekeeper necessarily. There's self-serve environments. There's things that could be done differently. And so really spending time to revisit the process, you will get pushback from people. You will have people that are uncomfortable letting go of things that they used to oversee and look after. But there's both a cost to facilitating that process change. I think the upside of doing it well far outweighs that cost. You should see those speed gains. And lastly, on the technology side, I think one of the, it may be obvious in saying this, but for many folks, you are used to having one large vendor that's a multi-million-dollar line item on your finance statement. You do one kind of multi-year negotiation, but you're now in a world where you are having a relationship with smaller vendors and many vendors, and they're smaller size deals. And so your procurement cycle, you need to be comfortable negotiating and buying from many vendors. That will feel like a bit of a change in your procurement cycle. You likewise will have to manage different maintenance cycles, whereas you're not just going from ATG 9 to ATG 10. You will have vendors that have different cycles. I will say, I'm probably the biggest advocate for this. I have seen too many people, and myself, been in this spot where you get left behind on a version of an ATG or a version of Demandware, and you get stuck and you run the risk of an end of life. Where, you get the notice that we're replatforming, 3 years extended support, and you're now in a massive, massive upgrade. If done well, yes, you have more activity. Yes, you have more vendors, but you are not at risk of any one point of failure where you have to do these massive cycles and you need to go to your CEO or CFO and say, yeah, I've got a big tech debt project. And everyone looks at you and says, another big tech debt project. How many of these am I funding? So you are no longer tied to this big cycle. It does change your buying cycle. It does change how you buy, though.
Yeah, well said. I'd like to point out the staffing. It just gets so much easier because with mock vendors, you're working with APIs, events, functions, and you can write functions in the programming language of your choice. So you don't have to have, Hybris certified architect and all of that. So a lot easier, and it definitely improves your TCO. So with that, we'll turn it back over to Scott, and we'll get to the panel here. Thanks, Dan.
Well, I'd like to keep you both on for a second before we go on to the audience polling questions. But I'm curious if you can share like a range of kinds of companies. Like, I don't know if it's by size or I don't know if you think about it like, well, it's good if you have, nicer margins, but if you're in a thin margin business, this isn't for you. Or is there any guidance you can give on the kind of companies that you see embracing this, that it is a good fit, or anything like that?
Yeah, I'd say if you're into the hundreds of millions of dollars in GMV, it's a pretty natural fit. Anybody who has a lot of complexity, maybe around the products they sell, Restoration Hardware is one of our customers, for example, and they have hundreds of thousands of combinations of fabrics, of buttons, of zippers on all of their furniture that they sell. Anybody doing something different, unique, maybe it's a subscription type of business model. Maybe you're paying with points for something. Maybe it's in-store kiosks, for example. But anything different is, I would say, a pretty good fit for this approach. Where it's not a good fit is lower margin. You're not really differentiating on the product. You're not really doing a whole lot of product discovery. Smaller, less technical enterprises, that's where we don't see as strong of a fit. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think for me, it comes down to if you're competing on experience or complexity. So I think a lot of earlier stage commerce sites, your product you're selling, maybe you have 50 SKUs, 100 SKUs, thousands of SKUs. That's the focus of your business, is just, hey, these SKUs are unique. I don't really need a lot of experience or wrapper around it. Probably not a fit. But for me, it was, as you start to really differentiate with omni-channel and needing to do things like curbside pickups and virtual bundles, where you are different, you're providing options on bundling SKUs, payment and financing, leasing SKUs. You start to add that complexity, and you just find that the kind of Swiss Army knife or stack in a box, you have to fight it, or you have to beg and plead for the vendor. I really hope you build this into your roadmap.
Awesome. I appreciate you both being really open about kind of where it's a good fit and where it may not be. So we're going to transition now to our audience polling questions. So I have a few questions, kind of want to see where the audience is and kind of where their heads are right now. So why don't we go to the first one? So the question is, how would you describe the importance of modernizing your commerce technology stack? Extremely important, very important, important, not very important, or not important at all? So we're seeing that the majority, it's important. So, I think between extremely important and very important is about 90%. Very important is around 52%, and extremely important is the remainder there. So that's good to, I think you're all in the right place, having this conversation on this webinar, based on seeing that. All right, next question we want to ask. Who is the champion and or driver of strategic e-commerce technology decisions at your company? So this is the person that is really kind of championing these kind of decisions to invest in modernizing technology. Is it the CEO and the board? Is it the CTO or CIO? Is it the head of e-commerce, the P&L owner for e-commerce, the chief digital officer? Or are you, in your organization, it's championed or driven through multiple functional areas? So let's see what everyone's saying. Well, it seems to be kind of coming down to chief digital officer. That's about 70%. And there's like a small group where it's the CTO, CIO, and a small group where it's driven from more than one function. All right, that's good to know. That'll come up later in our conversation. And finally, this is a tee up for next week's webinar. We are going to be talking about understanding shopper psychology as we get ready for Black Friday and Cyber Week. Yes, even though it's early August, it's time to be thinking about Black Friday and Cyber Week. So the question here is, what factors are influencing your company's Black Friday, Cyber Week 2023 preparations? Are you looking at consumer spending trends and economic forecasts, competitor analysis and benchmarking, supply chain disruptions or inventory challenges, customer feedback and post-event analytics from previous years, emerging retail technology and innovation, regulatory changes and compliance requirements, and then sustainability and eco-friendly initiatives. So you can select up to 3. So let's see what everyone is on their mind about this. Fairly spread out. It seems like kind of no surprise consumer spending trends and economic forecasts, and then competitor analysis and benchmarking, that makes up about 2/3. I can say that sustainability, eco-friendly initiatives is 0, and regulatory changes is 0. And then there's a little bit on emerging technology and innovation, and then the customer feedback. So thank you all for giving us a little bit of insight into how you're thinking about things right now. And with that, I would like to bring up our panel so we can get and hear from the operator's point of view, and as well as from Dan and Kelly, continue to hear their insights and experience. So, Joe and Angela, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you being here. So why don't we start, if you could each introduce yourselves, describe kind of your e-commerce architecture history, any history you have with Composable, and then, where your company seems to be going on your technology journey, and does that include Composable in the future? So, Joe, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me here. Appreciate it. Yeah, Kelly laid out 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. I think by that framework, I started at 0.0, before there even were these platforms in the mid to late 90s. I've paid the price on technical debt and platform transformations many times and over the last 30 years. With that, you see a lot of waves and improvements, and arguably things continue to get much better. But I've lived through this. Right now, as you said in the intro, I'm CEO of Cellars, a novel data-driven wine subscription, wine matching service. Prior to that, I was CEO of a mattress company called Purple. And before that, a retailer, American Eagle Outfitters. I bring up all of those as we went through sort of migrations on this journey at each of these. American Eagle, as we started to deal with the emergence of cloud-based architectures and having to migrate. Dan talked about end of life on systems like ATG and so forth, and beginning to get into omnichannel. We were dealing with all of those things, which were 7-figure projects measured in 4 to 8 quarters. These were massive initiatives, which is somewhat mind-boggling as Dan laid out the trying to change a form field kind of challenges. Purple, we went the other way. We were actually one of Shopify's largest customers. At a time, Shopify was very much just, it is what it is. I mean, one of the easiest platforms to onboard. But you asked Dan and Kelly the question of who's Composable right for? And, one dimension I'd put out there is when the needs you have extend beyond what the software vendors you're providing can do, you're likely ripe for Composable. And that's where we were. And it isn't even just SKU proliferation like came up. Just something as seemingly simple as the kind of promotions you want to run. And how you manage your offers and promotions is surprisingly basic in most e-commerce platforms. It is what it is. And the minute you start to actually create the kinds of experiences any good sales associate can create in the real world, in human interaction, you quickly discover these limitations. So you're then faced with either awful customization, which means you're forking from your platform and signing up for all sorts of maintenance and technical debt in the future? Or is there some way that you could find or build something that's truly independent and is not suddenly a risk you're taking on with the rest of your platform? It can live in its own thread. So, I mean, those were the kinds of things we were dealing with at Purple, and why we ultimately moved away from Shopify onto Commerce Tools, who's represented here. Cellars, we went the other way. We had a we had an entirely proprietary platform, given that when we started, we were already at that fork of there were no solutions out there that could meet our needs. So we had to build our own. And over time, the rest of the industry caught up, and we ended up going on to Shopify, where I went off. But even there, while that has enabled a significant reduction in labor and a significant, sort of, as Dan talked about, the speedboat of suddenly we can do things very quickly. As you start to get into a platform, you also get back to the issue of it does what it does. And, and we're already now just 6 months into this, discovering all the areas that we're having to work outside of Shopify to meet needs specific to our business. So you can't escape this. It's just a matter of the maturing of the industry to make this, how terrifying is this? How expensive is it? How complicated is it? And, fortunately with Composable, it's getting more manageable, where even a company the size of Bright Cellars, who's much smaller than these other retailers we talked about, this starts to become viable.
Thank you, Joe.
Sure.
Angela, if you could introduce yourself and help us understand kind of the technology journey you've been on and where things are going.
Sure. Thank you all for having me. I'm Angela Gruszka. I'm SVP of Digital Marketing and E-commerce at AERIN. Similar to Joe, I've been in the space for quite a while, and I've worked across everything from Demandware to Shopify to Adobe Commerce, formerly Magento. Worked across several different categories of business, from fine jewelry to fashion to home to beauty. Currently at AERIN, we just actually completed our re-platform to Adobe Commerce. And Composable has been an area of focus of me for quite a while. I've also sat on the board of advisors of Orium, formerly My Planet. So I do see the value that Composable can bring to an organization if it is the right fit. So, back in the day, when I started my journey into e-commerce, we built on Magento, and unfortunately, Magento couldn't solve our needs from a front-end perspective, so we layered WordPress on top of that, customized WordPress to meet our needs. So we were sort of just patching together different solutions to try to achieve our end result. And then I sort of moved on to another brand where we moved from Magento to Shopify because our business complexity was not as large, and we found that Shopify was sort of the one size fits all solution for our business. We're a single category business, and more recently now at AERIN. I joined AERIN. We were on Salesforce Commerce Cloud, and we are a small to medium-sized business. That being said, we have a high level of complexity. We have several different categories, several different configurable product types. We have several different types of vendors and products that are dropship vendors. So when you start to think about the complexity of the business, as well as the goals and objectives of the organization, Composable seems like a great fit. That being said, we are a small to medium-sized business. And when we started to evaluate, do we go headless, do we not go headless, or Composable, I think the one thing that came to mind for me was sort of the maturity of our business. And the way that our business is structured, we have several individuals that wear many hats. We don't really have the defined roles within the organization. And when you start to think about Composable and the microservices that are involved with Composable, one thing that's very critical is about having those defined roles and having those individuals that are dedicated to, let's say, personalization or operations and so forth. And I think that's a critical component of it because, when you're looking back at the sort of monolithic platforms, you normally have like your head of e-commerce and you have more of these like general e-commerce roles. But, what I'm seeing is when it comes to Composable, it sort of becomes more of a product management role. So it's a little bit different. And when I started to look at our organization and what it would take to transform it into an organization that was built around sort of that product mindset, I felt that we just weren't there yet. That's not to say we won't be there in the future. I think, one, advantage of AERIN is that we are very focused on growth. And I think when you're focused on growth, Composable is a great fit for your organization, largely due to the agility of it, and the ability to make change very quickly, to test and learn, which are all goals of our organization. So it's something that we're keeping on our roadmap. And I always love to take that sort of crawl, walk, run approach. So even though we're not there yet, we have made the leap into Adobe Commerce, largely because of the ability to customize the platform. And when we're looking at other solutions, aside from Composable, we were sort of limited in what we could do in terms of the customization to meet our needs. And we do have, a wide network of partners that support our business. And I think that's a big part of composability, is finding those microservices to support your business. So we have begun that journey in the sense that we do have partners that we could bring along with us if we decide to go composable in the future. And that's one of the advantages of working with Adobe. They also have the ability to offer PWAs and so forth, which sort of is aligned with that headless idea. So I think that, as a small and medium-sized business, you can start to build that infrastructure to support composability for the future, even if you're not yet there. So that's sort of my journey in this space.
Awesome. So I wanted to kind of go back to one of the polling questions we had about who should be, or who drives decisions about something like composable in the organization. And we saw that it was a lot of everyone voting on the chief digital officer / like e-commerce P&L owner, or the CTO / CIO. And I'm interested, I think I'd like to start with you, Joe. You were in a CEO role at Purple, and you made this transition to composable. And I know from the prep call, you are pretty passionate about this topic of kind of organizationally who's driving this and how this should happen. So I'm interested to hear your point of view, and then kind of hear Angela what she's thinking as well.
Yeah, it's I think Angela set this up right, which is, this gets away from being a functional thing where you're managing, like who manages the point of sale, who manages this platform, as it starts to become more distributed and almost egalitarian across the organization, which distributes responsibility, it distributes usage, it distributes requirements in new ways. When I was at American Eagle 10 years ago, as we embarked on our omnichannel journey, one of the first things we tried to do is, what are our omnichannel goals? And it took us probably a couple of months to realize that omnichannel wasn't a euphemism for e-commerce. And it was almost like this massive light bulb went off for all of us when we realized, our omnichannel goals are actually one and the same as our company goals, which is sort of the definition of omnichannel, all channels put together. And as soon as we realized that, it liberated us and opened the possibilities. And I think that's part of the problem, the intersection of how do you get composable going, because so long as it is a functional thing, a functional decision, my e-commerce platform, you're missing the omnichannel point. And where that gets difficult, and I had both my last two companies, this came up, is the organizations resist change. Organizations are set up to protect the business. Organizations are set up to get things done. Organizations have a lot of momentum and behaviors that have been learned through the years that allow the organization to survive and exist, and survive mistakes, and survive things that, how do you make sure good employees prosper and bad employees are survivable, and so forth. But when you're talking about a big change like this, especially one involving technology, imagine you're a CIO or CTO who spent 10 years building something that is now stable and give or take just works. And now you're saying, well, in this new world order, we don't need half of your team anymore, or 3/4 of your team. Who's going to say, hey, I'll sign up to let 3/4 of my team go because it's right for the business? That's a very, very forward-thinking leader, and they're out there and they're amazing. But to get to scale, to have that be available for any organization is really, really difficult. And organizations are almost set up to prevent those things from happening. And that's where I have been a little bit passionate that I think certainly at this point to take advantage, it has to be an organizational wide decision. It has to be supported top down, whether it's a CEO similar to my background who happens to have more of a digital and technical background, or whether it's just a forward-thinking CEO who recognizes this isn't just a technology decision, it's an organizational, it's an omnichannel decision. I think it has to require that organizational top-down support, because this really does fundamentally change the way of working across the organization, accountability, ownership, and as Angela said, it almost shifts more into a product management type of structure than a technical sort of structure.
But one thing I want to get clarified, Joe, you were talking about this, making this change in the CTO reducing their team. Is it reducing or like replacing with something different? I mean, like, is that can the folks listening to this, like, should they think that they could, or I don't, does that necessarily mean reduction in cost?
I mean, there have been pivots in labor utilization through the years, and it's easy to jump on as you eliminate manual or labor intensive processes. Does that mean everyone's going to lose their jobs, or does it mean you pivot them into different kinds of jobs? So I'm going to dodge that debate right now, because I do think we continue to find all sorts of amazing opportunities for talented technologists to continue to be employed and continue to work. But the nature of the jobs we had change here. You don't need 100 developers managing a large retailer anymore as you get into the ability to not have everything be custom and everything be a bastardization of either the monolithic platform you have or all of these crazy custom integrations into other systems that were never built to do the things you're trying to do with them. You just don't need to carry that weight. And with that weight comes the difficulty of doing things quickly, the 10 months to change a line of code. I mean, I was reading over the last couple of days how Meta launched Threads with a 60-person team, at a whatever they are, a 30 or 40,000, person engineering team or whatever it is. The idea that a focused, smaller team can accomplish so much more. The mythical man month that's existed out there in literature for a decade now, is true. And we carry a lot of weight and a lot of overhead in our organizations because of the way we used to do things. And this is a huge opportunity to change. In my business, it was absolute. At Bright Cellars, we're a smaller team, but we went from a team of close to 24 engineers and product managers and data and all of that down to a couple. As we've migrated this. Now we have outsourced some labor across different vendor partners. So, it's in-house versus partners, but our ability to lean on partners because we're leveraging standard platforms, standard technologies. As Kelly said, you're not bound to a single programming language. You're not bound to a single technical architecture. You can pull in and out the partners you need as you need them, which solves your ultimate goal. I mean, Angela said they're into growth. It's how do we grow our businesses? How do we create stability in our businesses, which creates opportunities for everybody?
Angela, anything you want to add from your perspective on kind of who should be the driver and, how this changes things organizationally? I mean, it seems like you're moving in that direction, so you haven't quite made all of those moves, but kind of curious, what you're thinking if that is in the future for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think to second what Joe said, it really starts from the top. So bringing all of the cross-functional leaders along for the journey. So, whether it's partnering with your CFO and communicating the value that Composable can bring. I think one of the most challenging parts of it when you're in the process of communicating the value is just the education, because it's so different from what they are used to or they spent their career working on. So I think that's a big aspect of it. So leveraging the knowledge of your partners, your apply digital commerce tools to help demystify the composable architecture to your leaders within the organization, whether that be your CEO, your board of directors, your CMO, and so forth. But I think it's really about getting those key stakeholders on board because, as Joe said, it may involve potentially restructuring some of their teams to support this new architecture. And maybe some of those generalists that they currently have in their teams are now going to have to be replaced with specialists and so forth. So it's starting to, number one, educate them. And then at the same time, I think express the value that this change will, how this value will, bring change to their organization and will also help just bring value to the overall, company as a whole. It's one thing that I've done in the past, just going through these re-platforms, working very closely with board of directors, CEOs, and so forth. And again, just going, demystifying it for them and understanding that if we make this change today, this is where we'll be in 5 years. But if we continue along the path, the way we are going right now, this is where we'll be. And so I think really starting to put that all on a board and so that they have full visibility and, truly where this could take them. I think that really helps with the process.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, if I may, there's a topic here that Angela brought up and we've been steering around, which really isn't about technology at all. I mean, it's about organizational maturity of taking ownership of things that used to be outsourced. I mean, if you outsource all your marketing to a marketing agency and you're not getting the performance you want, you call up the marketing agency and say, fix it. If you have an insourced marketing, which mature companies do and typically get much higher returns as they grow on that maturity, it's not as simple as agency go fix it. It's, well, which marketing team, what function, who owns that? And you also suddenly have to be really smart about all these things in marketing. You can't just, whether you're talking about outsourcing a call center, outsourcing manufacturing, we've outsourced e-commerce. And with these large platforms, we've let other companies figure these things out. Now, there are things, we don't need to, within a retailer, write our own database kernel. There are things, I'm not suggesting that we should bring everything in-house, but we outsourced everything. And what's happened now is we're realizing, hey, we actually know selling and retail better than our technology partners do. And now we can start to, and we have decades of experience doing this in brick and mortar and other channels. We can start to say, why are we having to contort ourselves to these technology platforms? We need to start taking ownership. But with that comes internal complexity. You actually have to understand what all these systems do. You actually have to understand why you're making the choices you're making. When things break down, it's not as simple as calling up Salesforce or calling up Oracle and saying it's broken, fix it. Even just figuring out who's at fault. I mean, we were dealing with an issue over the last couple of days where some orders weren't flowing through to our distribution center. And it could have been any of 3 different vendors. And as it turned out, it was none of the 3 vendors. It was something we did in-house. And, there's a whole triage process now that just isn't as simple as go call up the vendor and have them fix it. You have to understand these components. But the key here is this is about organizational maturity and taking ownership for the business you're in, which is very different than a technology discussion on working with a partner you're outsourcing. Again, no different than a marketing agency or a contact center.
So much has been said from Joe and Angela and Kelly and Dan. I just want to give you a chance to, comment on anything you've heard, pile on, offer, a different way of, not necessarily a different way of thinking about it, but, other paths that you've seen companies take.
It's been fascinating. We used to have like a CTO or somebody more on the technology side really be our motivator here. And now it's risen up to the CEO because many businesses, digital channels are the way that they transact. So it's risen past just a technology project off to the side to now being a key part of what the organization does. So that's been quite refreshing.
I would just add really quick, I echo everything said. I'd say the one thing not to do is, do not be a CTO or tech leader that treats this as, just another tech debt project and internalizes it. Like, you will 100% fail. You need that partnership. You at the same time need to make a case. This should be a positive, successful business case. Like, you should be anchoring to specific revenue growth goals, specific channel growth goals, cost savings, and that does need to elevate to the support of the CEO and the CFO. If you treat it as a private tech debt, you will fail. And I think a lot of people are used to traditionally, when we all do our major upgrades on ATG or whatever it is, those do go through that path. But you truly can't take this one through that path.
But Dan, the unfortunate truth there is a lot of companies, especially those in high growth, hit gates in their business where the people or teams who got them to where they are today quite successfully, and with an enormous amount of pride and ownership they can take in those accomplishments, aren't necessarily the people or teams who can then take to the next level. The rare companies are those that actually the teams can mature and go the distance and transform, and more power to them. But many can't. And that's one of the hardest things here is, do you have the leadership to get this done, or is it a different kind of leadership? Do you have the teams? I mean, in our last transformation, probably our single most strongest performer on the engineering team, who I actually fought to keep to see through this process, ultimately just couldn't get past that. He was sure we were going to fail. It was just a different way of doing things. And we didn't fail. But I would still speak highly of this person. But it just gets it. It's a different mindset. It's a different way of approaching things. And, one of the hard decisions may be, how do we bootstrap this? I mean, even chief digital officers came about because of, how do we bootstrap capabilities within organizations that didn't have them? I mean, that was the real number one responsibility. The early chief digital officers was bootstrap capabilities. And this is another bootstrapping exercise on learning how to behave, learning how to operate differently.
Well, we have a couple of minutes. There is a question that came in for you, Joe, that if you looked at Shopify Hydrogen as a headless solution when you moved there, and if you could give us a quick answer to that for Zach Abel at Tula Skincare, and then I want to get some kind of parting thoughts from everyone.
Yeah, what I will say about Shopify is, like, when I was at Purple and we made the decision to move off of Shopify was a very different company than they are today. And in fact, there's a reasonable argument, just given the disruption to the business and the expense on doing any platform migration, that if the Shopify today is who we were on then, would we have made the switch? I don't know. And again, this speaks volumes to the direction that all of these leading players are investing in, making more extensible solutions as they lean more and more into headless or composable commerce types capabilities. In the case of Shopify, at my current company, they had not yet announced the headless components yet. So full transparency, that wasn't part of our decision. We expected they would, that there'd be more and more ways to get there. I think the writing was on the wall, and we were thrilled when we saw that they were starting to head down that path directly. But the reality is, Shopify's ecosystem has headless, has a spirit of headless to it. Shopify at its core is a fairly basic platform. What they've done is created a set of extensions where you can, both build custom apps or integrate entirely separate third parties in a pretty seamless way. It's pretty amazing, the ecosystem they've built. The challenge is, the core of Shopify is the core of Shopify, and there are things you can't modify everything. but at its core, it's products and transactions and basket and nearly everything else they've exposed one way or another, and they continue to head down the path of making that more extensible.
All right. So just to wrap up, boy, this hour went fast. I want to have everybody just like offer one recommendation for the audience listening if they're composable curious, or they've started on that path. Angela?
I think that if you haven't started on that path, you should. I think it's really important to educate yourself on composable commerce, speak to the experts. It may not be right for you at this time, but I do believe composable is the future. And it's important to, like I said, educate yourself on it and start to explore it to see where it fits, within your roadmap.
Joe?
Yeah, and there's a good chance to say, at Purple we did move entirely onto Commerce Tools, who's leading the Mock, who really launched the Mock Alliance and has really been a driving force. And we have no regrets on that decision, and it was right for Purple at the time, and Purple has done well by the platform, and a lot of that comes up to an example I gave. We had very unique needs for like promotion management, for offers. And in this case, it was a perfect example of where there was no third party that could do what we wanted. So here was a chance for differentiated IP, but we were able to build that in a way that didn't create risk in our overall business, because we could integrate into the standard Commerce Tools platform in a way that no matter what Commerce Tools did, we could manage our promotions engine, or if another promotions third party came along that was even better than we built ourselves, we could swap it out without having to have a full platform migration. And those are the kinds of things we knew we'd need to invest in. And it's a use case or a case study where composable commerce really worked for Purple.
Dan?
I'll echo what both said. I think that there's a sweet spot for, it's composable right for you, kind of between here and here, and that gives you a speed and capabilities boost of this. And so I think, to Angela's point, just starting to educate yourself with just kind of, am I in the right sweet spot? If not now, maybe I can take some baby steps towards this, and we see if our business grows in complexity or size, and which we're sort of primed to go. As well, I think my email's on the deck. If you're not sure if you're in the sweet spot, email me. I'm happy to chat with you. When it comes to Best Buy, we were in that sweet spot, and I can say definitively there are things that we did, especially that was necessitated by COVID. I don't think we would have been able to do those things with the speed we did if we had not made that change. 1 hour curbside pickup, I don't think would have been possible with our previous stack. We would wait in months. So that's my thoughts on it.
And I don't know, final thought, Kelly?
Just do it. Stop with the endless decision paralysis and hiring strategy consultants to put together 500-slide PowerPoint decks and requirements. No, just do it. I'll leave it at that.
All right. Short and sweet. All right. Angela, Joe, Dan, Kelly, thank you so much for spending some time and the prep that you did in advance of this and sharing your insights with our audience. Really appreciate it. Have an awesome day. We are back with the next webinar on Cyber Week and Holiday 2023 on August 16th, and we hope to see you then. Until then, have a great couple of weeks, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.